What if I told you that Disney's Lion King isn't just a story? What if the tale of a crippled prince who couldn't walk was mocked and exiled, but returned to defeat a tyrant and build the greatest empire Africa had ever seen was absolutely real? This is the story of Sundiata Keita, the original Lion King, whose empire would become so wealthy that his descendant, Mansa Musa, would literally crash entire economies with his generosity. But before we dive into this epic tale of magic, betrayal, destiny, and triumph, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this channel brings you the untold African stories that Hollywood borrowed from but never gave credit to. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let's travel back to 13th century West Africa, where our story begins, not with a roar, but with a prophecy. Our story begins in the kingdom of Kangaba, a small Mandinka state in what is now Mali, around the year 1217. The king, Nare Magan Konate, received two mysterious hunters who came bearing an extraordinary prophecy. They told him that if he married a woman they would bring to him, an ugly woman with a hunchback, she would bear him a son who would become the greatest king West Africa had ever known, a king who would unite warring kingdoms and create an empire that would stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the desert's edge. The woman's name was Sogalan Konde, and the griots, or traditional storytellers, say she carried the spirit of the buffalo. When she arrived, the king's court was shocked. She was indeed physically deformed, and the other wives, especially the first wife, Sasuma Berete, mocked her mercilessly. But King Nare Magan remembered the prophecy and married her. In 1217, Sogolan gave birth to a son, Sundiata, whose name means lion prince or the lion thief. But this destined prince was born with a terrible affliction. His legs were weak and twisted. He could not walk. He could barely crawl. While other children his age ran and played, 7-year-old Sundiata dragged himself along the ground. The prophecy seemed like a cruel joke. How could this crippled child become a great king? Sasuma Berete, who wanted her own son, Dankaran Tuman, to inherit the throne, mocked Sogalan constantly, calling her son worthless, a disgrace to the royal lineage. One day, Sasuma went too far. She publicly humiliated Sogalan, mocking her because, unlike other wives who could send their sons to fetch leaves from the baobab tree for cooking, Sogalan had to fetch her own because her son couldn't walk. Sogalan returned home in tears, and for the first time, young Sundiata saw his beloved mother broken by shame. According to the griots, this was the moment everything changed. Sundiata called for the royal blacksmith and demanded he forge the strongest iron rod possible. When it was brought to him, this 9-year-old boy who had never walked grabbed that iron rod, planted it in the ground, and with every ounce of strength in his body, pulled himself up. The griots say the iron rod bent under his weight like a bow. The earth trembled, and then Sundiata stood. For the first time in his life, the Lion King stood on his own 2 feet. But he didn't stop there. He walked to a massive baobab tree, the same type of tree his mother needed leaves from, and with his bare hands, he uprooted the entire tree and dragged it to his mother's door, declaring that she would never suffer humiliation again. That day, everyone knew the prophecy was real. But Sundiata's troubles were far from over. When King Nare Magan died, Sasuma Berete manipulated the succession, placing her own son, Dankaran Tuman, on the throne instead of Sundiata. Fearing that Sundiata would one day claim his rightful place, she began to plot to have him assassinated. At the same time, a terrible threat was rising in the region. Suma Oro Kante, the king of Soso, was a powerful sorcerer king who practiced dark magic. He wore a cloak made of human skin, kept rooms full of magical instruments made from the bodies of his enemies, and was said to be invincible in battle. His cruelty was legendary. He conquered kingdom after kingdom, and now he set his sights on Kangaba. When Sumaoro's armies approached, the cowardly Dangkaran Tuman did something unthinkable. He surrendered without a fight and fled, abandoning his people to slavery and torture under Sumaoro's brutal rule. Meanwhile, Sogalan, knowing her son's life was in danger from multiple threats, made the painful decision to take Sundiata into exile. They fled Kangaba with a small group of loyal followers, wandering from kingdom to kingdom across West Africa. For years they lived as refugees, sometimes welcomed, sometimes rejected, always moving, always waiting. During these exile years, Sundiata wasn't idle. He trained as a warrior, learned strategy and diplomacy, studied the kingdoms and peoples of the region, and built alliances. The crippled boy was becoming a master hunter, a skilled warrior, and a brilliant leader. He was becoming the lion the prophecy foretold. Back in Kangaba, Sumaoro's oppression had become unbearable. The Mandinka people were enslaved, tortured, and scattered. In desperation, the elders sent a secret delegation to find Sundiata in exile. They traveled for months, searching across West Africa, until they found him in the kingdom of Mima, where he had risen to become a trusted military commander. Their message was simple: come home, save your people, fulfill your destiny. Sundiata agreed, but he knew he couldn't face Sumaoro alone. So he did something remarkable. He began uniting the fractured kingdoms and clans of West Africa. He called upon every alliance he had built during his exile, every friendship he had forged, every debt that was owed to him. Slowly, surely, he assembled a grand coalition. Mandinka, Fulani, Wola, and warriors from a dozen different peoples rallied to his cause. This wasn't just about reclaiming his throne, it was about liberating all the people suffering under Sumaoro's tyranny. In 1235, the two armies met at the Battle of Kirina, and it would determine the fate of West Africa. The griots tell us that Sumaoro seemed invincible. Arrows bounced off him, spears could not pierce him, his magic protected him, and Sundiata's forces began to despair. But Sundiata learned Sumaoro's secret. The sorcerer king had one weakness, an arrow tipped with the spur of a white rooster, the one thing his magic could not defend against. Sundiata's best archer fired that special arrow, striking Sumaoro and breaking his magical protection. Seeing their invincible leader wounded, Sumaoro's army panicked and fled. The tyrant himself disappeared, and legend says he turned himself into stone in a cave, where he remains to this day. Sundiata won. The Lion King had triumphed. After his victory, Sundiata didn't just reclaim Kangaba, he transformed it. In 1235, he gathered representatives from all the kingdoms and clans that had fought with him and established something revolutionary, the Mali Empire, with himself as Mansa, or emperor. But here's what makes Sundiata truly extraordinary. He created the Kurukana Fuga, often called the Manden Charter, one of the world's first constitutions. This document, preserved orally by griots for centuries, established laws that were remarkably progressive for the 13th century. It abolished slavery by birth, established social classes based on occupation alone rather than birth, protected the environment by forbidding the destruction of forests without reason, established women's rights including protection from abuse, created councils to advise the king, and established the griot tradition as the official keepers of history and knowledge. Under Sundiata's rule, the Mali Empire became the dominant power in West Africa. He controlled the gold and salt trade routes, transforming Mali into an economic powerhouse. He promoted agriculture, established new cities, encouraged scholarship and Islamic learning, and created a system of provinces governed by loyal generals and administrators. The empire he built would eventually stretch over 1.2 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Western Europe, encompassing parts of modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and Burkina Faso. Sundiata Keita ruled until his death around 1255, but his legacy lived on through his descendants. One of those descendants, his great-nephew, was Mansa Musa, who would become famous as the richest man in history when he made his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, giving away so much gold that he caused inflation across the Mediterranean. But Mansa Musa's wealth was built on the foundation Sundiata laid. The institutions, the trade routes, the political systems, the empire itself, all of it started with a boy who couldn't walk, who was mocked and exiled, but became the greatest king West Africa had ever seen. Today, griots across West Africa still sing the epic of Sundiata, keeping his story alive across generations. He is remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator, a unifier, and a lawgiver who proved that true strength comes not from where you start, but from your courage to rise. The Lion King was real. His name was Sundiata Keita, and his roar still echoes across Africa today.
If this story amazed you, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because African history is full of stories this powerful that the world needs to know. See you in the next one.